So transformation by horizontal translation. We're going to look at the translation here is 1t, just to remind us. That's 1t, typo. Now, and so what that meant is the graph is going to be moving shift to the left or shift to the right. And that's what we're going to look at. We're going to look at horizontal translation. So here's a function of x. This is f of x equals sine x. Sine 0 degrees is 0, and sine 90 degrees is 1, and sine 180 degrees is 0. So we have on the x-axis is pi. So pi radians, that's pi, is equal to 180 degrees. If that was a number, I'll put c in there, 3.14. So that's radians. If I divide 180 by 2, I'll get 90 degrees. So that means I divide pi over 2 is 90 degrees. And if I divide 180 by 4, I get 45. So pi over 4 equals 45 degrees. So what we have here is we've got here, you can see that's pi 0 there, and here the next is here. This is minus pi over 4. So that means x equals minus pi over 4 there. So what I can do is say, well, I can see that x equals minus pi over 4. That's a root, because this, where it crosses the x-axis are the roots. And so what I can do now is turn the root into a factor, so that becomes x plus pi over 4. And that's what we have now. We have the function of, so that means the sine is a function of x plus pi over 4. And that's what we have. And that's why it's shift to the left. If you have the equation as it is sine x plus pi over 4, you have to set that to 0. And that means x plus pi over 4 equal to 0. And then now you can get a root again if you want to get a root. And that will be, well, x equals minus pi over 4. So that's where it will cross. The x at minus pi over 4 is a root. And so we now know what a function is. This is a function of x plus pi over 4. And that is sine x plus pi over 4. Right, for the second graph below, just to not to forget, the graph above is f of x equals sine of x. Now, the graph below is basically, we can see here that it's a positive root here. It's going from 0 to a positive root there. And where it crosses, it's, okay, it's a ratio here because 90 is 5. That's 90. And that's about 1.7 stuff, 1.8, 1.7. And that's 30 because that's 90 here. Pi over 2 is 90. And that's 30 degrees here. So that's 30 degrees. That's pi over 6. So that's where it's crossing there. Because it's pi over 6, that meant x equals pi over 6, and that's a root because that's where it crosses the x-axis. So that's a root. You have to turn it to factor, subtracting pi over 6 from both sides, or moving pi over 6 to the left, and then you get x minus pi over 6. Now that's a factor. So if I then put my sine in there, and that's the function there. So this one is f of x minus pi over 6. And that will be sine x minus pi over 6. So that's what's happening there. That one is shifted to the right, so it's got to be plus. Again, if you're given that, if you're given x minus pi over 6, all you need to do is just say x minus pi over 6 equals 0. Therefore, x equals pi over 6, because you add pi over 6 to both sides. Then you know it's crossing at pi over 6. Right there, that's pi over 6. So how do you know? Well, sine x, that's sine x. It goes through 0, and then pi 0 and 2 pi 0. So that's sine of x. Now we can see it's been shifted here, and the next one we see along here is minus pi over 4, and then you have to say, well, x equals pi over minus pi over 4, and then add pi over 4 to both sides. You get x plus pi over 4, and then put sine in front of that, and then you get your function. So that function is sine x plus pi over 4. So therefore that is f of x plus pi over 4. Or if you're given sine x plus pi over 4, all you need to do is set the bracket to, if you set the bracket to 0, that means x plus pi over 4 equals to 0, then x equals minus pi over 4, because you take away pi over 4 from both sides. In this one, if you set this one to 0, x to 0, you can see that's 0. X to 0, that means x equals to 0, so that's 0. In this case, x equals minus pi over 4 here. And so with this one here, you can see it's a positive value, so we can find a ratio. That's 5 little squares in makes 2 pi, 90. Divide 90 by 5, you get 18. 18 times 1.7 or 1.69, that's what that is. So it's about 30 degrees. That's pi over 6. And so you can say, well, x equals pi over 6. That's a root. Turn into factor. That means take away pi over 6 from both sides. You get x minus pi over 6. And that's the function. Now, so those are the functions in this case. That's how it shifts from left to right. By, if it's positive, then it's shifting to the left. And if it's negative here, it will be shifting to the right. As you can see, this is negative here, it's shifted to the right, and then this is positive, it's shifted to the left. So finally we can say when c is greater than 0, that means positive, then sine x plus c will shift to the left. And when c is less than 0, sine of x minus c will shift to right. This transformation applies to both cos x and tan x functions.